We live our lives now glued to these little glass screens, texting, scrolling, completely forgetting the world we just left behind. A world where, until the early 2000s, your phone could scream into the silence of your own home at any moment. A stranger's voice on the other end, for any reason at all. And if that voice knew the right words to say, the perfect psychological pressure points to press to keep you from hanging up, you would find yourself trapped. A prisoner on your own line, subjected to a slow, deliberate unraveling of your own mind. This is a story about phone calls, several of them, but that's just the surface, the part of the beast you can see moving under the water. In reality, those calls were a single thread in a much larger, much darker tapestry. And despite every effort, every obsessive researcher, and every frantic theory, no one has ever managed to find a clean, simple explanation for the bizarre, reality-bending events that began with the Sudbrink phone calls. Even now, with all the facts laid out on the table, it's impossible to pin down exactly what kind of story this is. Is it a straight-up case of government harassment, a desperate attempt to bury a secret? Or is it something else, something older and far stranger? Was this actual contact, a fragile, terrifying bridge built to an intelligence that is not of this world? Or perhaps the most frightening idea of all, was this a crack in reality itself? An instance where the rules broke down and something from elsewhere bled through into our world. Most who have dug into this darkness agree the story belongs to a specific, shadow-drenched category. It belongs to the enigmatic, the unnatural. It belongs to the men in black. These figures, named for the dark, almost uniform-like suits they wear, have haunted the edges of UFO lore and conspiracy since the 1950s. We assume they're government agents, a clean, easy answer. But the stories tell a different tale. Those who have met them speak of something off. Their mannerisms are wrong, stilted. Like they're learning human behavior from a poorly written manual. They use words that don't quite fit, phrases that feel recycled and unnatural. They fail to respond to simple questions, their eyes empty and fixed. So while some believe they are just bureaucrats with a dark purpose, others whisper a more terrifying truth. Maybe they aren't human at all. Maybe they are the extraterrestrials themselves. Or perhaps they are something worse, beings under a form of alien control, puppets with dead eyes and colder hearts. And their harbingers are almost always the same, unmarked black helicopters. The stories of these sinister machines exploded in the 1970s and 80s, forever tied to the aftermath of a UFO sighting. Witnesses are always specific, no markings, no insignias, no registration numbers. Nothing, not even what you'd see on a military craft. In some cases, they are said to be unnervingly quiet, possessing a UFO-like silence that defies physics. They use this stealth to stalk. They fly low over the homes of witnesses, their rotors beating a rhythm of dread into the roof. They chase cars down lonely highways, engaging in a menacing, aerial game of cat and mouse. All of this, the men in black, the silent helicopters, it's the essential background noise you need to understand the theories swirling around the Sudbrink case. But to truly feel the chill, to understand the depth of the mystery, you have to hear the calls for yourself. And thankfully we can. The family had an answering machine. They captured it. Now, more than 3 decades later, we can still listen to the actual recorded voice that asked a simple question, a question that would become a landmark of the unexplained. The voice that whispered, "Is this Gary Sudbrink?" Like all the best and worst tales, this one truly started long before anyone knew it had begun. And to fully understand the gut-level unease, the profound wrongness of it all, to truly feel the weight of those phone calls, to understand the deep, psychological damage they inflicted, you have to see how they were never the whole story. They were just one piece of a much larger, much more frightening puzzle, a single thread in a tapestry of dread. The first thread, the one that started it all, seems almost harmless on its own, a simple case of mistaken identity. But when you pull on that thread, When you connect it to the whispers on the phone and the things that came after, a pattern begins to form. A pattern that looks less like coincidence and more like a target being painted on a man's back. And that man was Air Force Captain Gary Sudbrink. Our story truly begins in 1992. The scene is a wedding reception on Long Island. Laughter, music, the clinking of glasses. In the middle of it all is Gary, a drink in his hand, finally relaxing. He'd just flown in from Texas, where he was stationed, and he'd spent the last day catching up with family he hadn't seen in years. He was just about to go find his brother, the groom, to offer his congratulations when Stephen found him first. But Stephen wasn't in a congratulatory mood. He was annoyed. He started ribbing Gary about his weird behavior on the road earlier that day. Gary was lost. He had no idea what his brother was talking about, so Stephen laid it out. That morning, driving to his own wedding, he'd seen Gary's car come speeding up behind him. Not a similar car, Gary's car. He described how it pulled up right alongside him. And how Gary, his own brother, was behind the wheel, making these bizarre faces and gestures directly at him. Then, this Gary, this doppelganger, just sped off, racing down the highway as if to beat him to his own wedding. Gary listened to this story, and you can imagine the chill that must have gone down his spine. He took a deep breath and gave his brother the facts. He had flown into New York. His car, the one Stephen was so sure he'd seen, was sitting safely, thousands of miles away, in his garage in San Antonio. There was no physical way he could have been on that road. The two brothers stood there in the middle of their celebration, surrounded by joy, with this cold, inexplicable mystery suddenly between them. They brushed it off. What else could they do? It was a wedding, but the moment stuck with them. It was a splinter in the mind, and 1 year later, when the phone started to ring at the Sudbrink family home, that splinter would fester into a full-blown nightmare. February 1993. Gary, now back at his base in San Antonio, realizes he has a few days of leave. On a whim, he decides to fly back home to Long Island. It's important to understand, this was a spontaneous trip. He didn't file the standard paperwork. He didn't tell his superiors he was going. As far as the United States Air Force was concerned, Captain Gary Sudbrink was still in Texas. This detail is what turns the next series of events from strange to deeply sinister. The first sign that something was wrong happened as he was packing his bag, alone in his Texas apartment. A sudden, violent roar ripped through the air. The sound was unmistakable to a trained Air Force officer, a helicopter, and it was close, too close. He rushed out onto his balcony and saw it, hovering just beyond his fence line. It was low, so low it felt like it was in his backyard, maybe 20 feet off the ground. This wasn't just a breach of protocol. It was an act of recklessness no military pilot would ever risk in a residential area. But the most unnerving part was its position. The helicopter wasn't just flying past. It was stationary, and its nose was pointed directly at his apartment. It was facing him, watching. By the time Gary ran back inside to grab a pair of binoculars to get a tail number, the craft had ascended and vanished into the sky, as if it had never been there at all. If Gary thought that was the end of it, he was wrong. It was just the opening act. Several hours later, he's at the San Antonio airport, standing in the terminal. He's in his uniform, waiting to board his flight home. Then a man approaches, a slim man in a long overcoat. The man was friendly, too friendly, and he immediately started asking questions about Gary's travel plans. Trying to be polite, Gary mentioned he was heading to New York to see family. But his politeness turned to unease when he saw the man was writing his answers down in a small notebook. The questions got more personal, more intrusive. The man asked for his full name. Gary refused. He was in uniform, his ID was right there, but something felt deeply, deeply off. This man wasn't just making conversation. He was conducting an interview, and Gary had no idea who or what he was working for. Gary's eyes flicked down to his uniform, a cold knot tightening in his stomach. His surname wasn't visible. This man hadn't just guessed who he was, he knew. When Gary finally asked why he was being interrogated in the middle of a busy terminal, the man offered up a flimsy, rehearsed excuse. He claimed he was starting a small business, just doing a survey, but Gary's military-trained mind noticed the details. This guy hadn't spoken to a single other soul. He had cut through the crowd with a singular purpose, a predator zeroing in on its prey. When Gary pointed this out, the man's response was a quiet, chilling assurance. "Don't worry," he said, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "You won't get into trouble." It wasn't a reassurance. It was a threat disguised as comfort. The call for his flight section felt like a rescue. Gary practically fled onto the plane, desperate to leave that strange, piercing gaze behind. But the reprieve was short-lived. No sooner had he sunk into his seat than another man slid in beside him. Long hair, glasses, a friendly enough demeanor. He struck up a conversation that at first felt like the normal, casual chatter you have with a seatmate. He asked where Gary was flying, how long he'd be gone. It felt harmless, until another passenger tapped him on the shoulder and told him he was in the wrong seat. The man apologized, moved across the aisle, and kept talking. Kept asking questions. Then a flight attendant approached. He was in the wrong seat again. This time he didn't even try to sit. He just stood by the emergency exit, his body angled toward Gary, his questions becoming more persistent, more specific. He wanted to know when Gary was returning to Texas. And then, the strangest question of all, how did he spell his last name? That was the final straw. The Air Force captain shut down, refusing to answer. Only then did the man finally retreat, moving to his actual seat, which was rows and rows behind him. The whole performance had been a charade. By the time his plane touched down in New York, a deep-seated paranoia had taken root. Gary's first thought was that the men on the plane were a distraction, a team sent to keep him occupied while someone else robbed his empty apartment in Texas. He immediately called his landlady, his voice tense, begging her to keep an eye on the place. He was spiraling. He arrived at his family's home on Long Island, the weight of the day crushing his shoulders. He started telling his father about the helicopter in Texas, the strange men at the airport, the feeling of being watched. To his absolute horror, his father cut him off. "A helicopter," he said. A low-flying helicopter had been hovering over this house, over the Sudbrink family home, just that afternoon. And then his father confessed something he'd been holding on to. Several weeks earlier, he and Gary's uncle had taken a road trip to West Virginia. Their destination was the Green Bank Observatory, a place famous for its massive radio telescopes. They were UFO buffs, and they'd gone to see the new 485-foot-tall dish that had been built to replace the old one, the one that had mysteriously, catastrophically collapsed a few years back. The official report blamed a failed metal plate, but in the community Gary's father lived in, the truth was far more exciting. Many believed it had been attacked, sabotaged by forces from beyond our world. And on that trip, Gary's father and uncle had seen something. They'd had a sighting. Gary, a man of logic and military precision, wrote it off. He didn't believe in flying saucers, but his father was adamant. He'd seen what he'd seen. This moment is often treated as a side note, a quirky character detail, but it's not. It's the key. It's the catalyst for everything that was about to happen. Later that evening, trying to shake the creeping dread, Gary decided to call his old friend Mike. It was supposed to be a normal call, a touchstone to his old life, but from the moment Mike answered, nothing was normal. "You're sounding better already," Mike said, cheerful and familiar. Gary was frozen. He had no idea what Mike was talking about. Mike, confused, clarified. They had just spoken 20 minutes ago. Mike said Gary had sounded like he had a bad cold. The blood must have drained from Gary's face. He hadn't called Mike. He hadn't told anyone he was even in New York. Yet his best friend was insisting, with total certainty, that he had just had a full conversation with him. As they frantically compared details, Gary realized the imposter had slipped up. He'd gotten small facts wrong, like which airport he'd flown into. It was a flawless impersonation, but not a perfect one. They were still untangling the nightmare when a faint beep signaled another call waiting on the line. Gary, his heart hammering against his ribs, told Mike he had to go. He clicked over. The voice that came through the receiver was mechanized, alien, and utterly devoid of life. Yes, it stated, a flat electronic sound. I'll tell you who it is. Hello. The phone line clicked and a voice, thin and distorted, seeped into Gary's ear. It was a mockery of human conversation, a series of broken phrases stitched together. Yeah, do you want to speak to him there? Yeah, who's this? Steven. Are you playing games with me or what? A spark of angry, desperate hope flared in Gary's chest. This had to be his brother. It had to be. Steven, if you're playing games, he growled, the threat a fragile shield. I'm going to kick your ass. The voice on the line didn't flinch. It didn't react. It just continued its flat, monotonous interrogation. So how long are you going to be back from Texas? Huh, you're being impersonated by the other voice. The words impersonated by the other voice landed not as a sentence, but as a cold, sharp blade. This thing, whatever it was, knew. It knew about the call to Mike. It knew a copy of him was already walking through his life. The anger in his voice cracked, revealing the raw fear beneath. Yeah, this is you, Steven. You idiot, you're pissing me off, jerk. I'm going to get you. He pulled the phone away, his eyes searching the call display for any piece of hard, logical data. Let's see what it says. Review one new call. Out of area. Is Steven out of the area? The entity instantly parroted him, its syntax crumbling. You're going to be back from Texas. Wait, say that again. You're being impersonated by the other voice. Wait, hold on. Is Steven out of the calling area or what? I don't know. Gary's voice rose, bordering on hysterical. What do you mean you don't know? He's in Queens. Who are you talking? I don't know who. Hello, hello, silence. A hollow electronic hiss. Hello, Gary whispered, the words swallowed by the static. Then the voice returned, as if their entire exchange had been erased from its memory. Sounds like a robot. Hello. Are you going to be back from Texas? The conversation spiraled into a dizzying, nonsensical loop. Gary, an Air Force captain trained for crisis, was being systematically disassembled by a script that defied all reason. What was that again, sir? You being impersonated by the other voice. Oh, be quiet. Off F. He caught the profanity, choking on it. He was losing himself. Sorry. Would you see that again? Hello. Being impersonated by what voice? Hello. Yeah, hello there. Yeah, hold on a second. He forced a breath, trying to steady his shaking hands. Yeah, what is your question? I'll answer it. The response was the same maddening, broken record. So how long are you going to be back from Texas? How long you being impersonated by the other voice? Defeated, Gary tried to play along with the insanity. Right, when am I coming back? Is that your question? Okay, it was a break, hold on. You want to know when I'm coming back to Texas. Oh, is that your question? The thing confirmed with its own twisted logic. So how long are you going to be back from Texas? How long am I going to be back from Texas? The sheer grammatical absurdity of it broke him. That question doesn't make any sense. Other voice. Okay, I'll be coming back eventually. I can't tell you when. You should know the answer to the question because you seem to know more about me than I do. You know what I'm saying. Are you an intergalactic person? Are you a space alien? The line went dead. The dial tone was a sudden, screaming silence in the room. Sounds like you hung up, he muttered to no one. I can't believe this. He hung up. He turned, his voice a tremble, calling out to someone else in the house. Carrie, see if he comes back. All right, I'll hang up. The receiver settled into its cradle with a final, heavy click. The ordinary sound was somehow terrifying. Jesus Christ, he breathed out, the air leaving his lungs. Oh my God. In that recording, you can hear a man's reality fracture. The initial anger is just a performance. A last-ditch effort to believe this is a cruel joke from his brother Steven. But as the call grinds on, that performance shatters. The voice's repetitive, circular nature, its unnatural cadence that ignores all human social cues, begins to poison him. Then there are the words themselves, each one a calculated piece of the nightmare. Is Gary Sudbrink there? Always with a slight digital stutter on the surname, as if tasting the name. So how long are you going to be back from Texas? A question that is fundamentally broken, as if translated through a faulty system from another world. And finally, the most cryptic message of all, a statement that was both a warning and a confession. You're being impersonated by the other voice. When Gary checked the caller ID, it showed the call was coming from out of the area. This was a lie made of data. His brother lived in nearby Queens. The geographical disconnect was the final proof. This wasn't his brother. This was something wearing his brother's name like a skin, something that knew about the imposter call to Mike, something that was focused on his travel plans with a terrifying, single-minded purpose. The family tried to cling to normalcy. They forced themselves to believe it was an elaborate gag, a prank that had gone too far. They tried to go about their business, to pretend the walls of their home were still solid. It was a fragile lie, and it didn't last. Just 40 minutes later, the silence was once again shattered by the ring of the telephone. Gary answered. The voice on the other end was the same, yet profoundly different, slower. More fragmented, as if its connection to our world was degrading, burning out. The words were like scattered shards of glass. What is your question? Yes, speaking, Sudbrink. Yes. Could I answer you any questions for you? Now the thing was offering to answer his questions. The script had flipped. I'm not back yet. No, let me answer first. You tell me, where are you calling from? Yeah. Why don't you tell me where you're calling from? Who is this? The voice responded with a line that froze the blood in Gary's veins. It was no longer an it. It was claiming an identity, slipping into his skin. What do you mean, who is this? You should know who it is. It's me, Gary. The imposter was no longer just calling him. It was claiming to be him. Wait, let me ask you this question. Where are you calling from? The voice ignored him, its programming stuck on a new final loop. Okay, I'll be back. Excuse me, I can't hear too well. Hello? Yeah, it is a full moon out, that's true. It was commenting on the weather, on the moon in the sky. The sheer, horrifying banality of it was worse than any threat. Could you identify yourself? Gary pleaded, his composure crumbling to dust. Identify yourself. Why are you calling me? Excuse me. I cannot hear you on the hold on. Let me switch phones. There was a click, a moment of dead air that stretched into an eternity. Gary waited, his heart a frantic, trapped animal against his ribs. Okay, hold on. He listened, desperate for a clue, for anything that made sense. Now, who are you? The voice returned, slower now, each word dripping like syrup through the static. Keep an eye in the sky, it intoned, a broken record from the void. Keep an eye in the sky. Yeah, okay, hold on, Gary replied, his voice tight with a mixture of fear and frustration. Repeat that again, please repeat. Okay. Near Orion tonight, or with the full moon. Hey, repeat. Repeat last word. I'm hearing static. The line died. He hung up, Gary whispered to the room. He hung up, but the silence was brief. The phone rang again, and this time the question had mutated. Is the Gary Sudbrink? It asked, the grammar slipping further from human speech. Then it pivoted, abandoning its previous script entirely. It commanded them to look up, to watch the heavens, obsessing over the constellation Orion and the cold, full moon hanging in the night. The mention of Orion sent a jolt through Gary's father. This was it, a sign. This had to be connected to the light he'd seen streaking across the West Virginia sky. Just before the line cut out, the voice delivered its most cryptic message yet. Show double of you. Where the first call was unsettling, this one was a targeted strike. It felt deliberate, a message crafted not just to confuse, but to guide. Gary's father was now a believer. The strange man at the airport, the low-flying helicopter, the imposter, it was all part of a conversation with something not of this earth. His UFO sighting wasn't a footnote, it was the reason. This conviction boiled over during the third call, which came deep into the night. At 11:38 p.m. desperation now gripped both men, each trying to wrestle answers from the static in their own way. Okay, yeah. It's taken time from the tour. Who is this? The voice asked, its phrasing more alien than ever. Stephen, Gary pleaded, his anger a thin veneer over sheer terror. This is not funny, Brian. It's not Stephen. What do you mean, Brian? I mean, Gary. How do I know it's not Stephen? It's not Stephen. Then Gary's father seized the phone, his voice trembling with awe and fear. Hello. I had a UFO experience in West Virginia, which you probably know, and I know that you're an intergalactic person. Can you speak a little louder, sir? Can you speak a little louder? Louder, the voice on the line seemed to reject him, refusing to engage. Let me speak to him, Dad, Gary interjected. I guess I don't know. All right, I'll hang up so you can talk to me. He wants to talk to you. Gary came back on the line, the last bastion of skepticism in a house losing its grip on reality. Okay, hello, can I help you? Hello? Yes, that's me, yes. Could you please identify yourself? Identify. Yeah, I'm back. I'm in Texas right now. The entity was lying, claiming to be in Texas while Gary stood in New York. It was weaving a new layer of deception. Oh, he asked me a question. No, I'm in New York right now. You know that. Why are you asking me such a question? Gary's voice cracked. Yes, Stephen, if this is you, I swear to God, I'm gonna be pissed. But the prank theory was a dead man walking. The voice continued, ignoring his threats, its energy seeming to wane. I'm trying to listen to him. Excuse me. Okay, eventually I'll be back from Texas. Just, could you speak more, please speak more. I guess it's not Stephen. I believe it because I'm getting static. Well, not 3 times. Let me go on his phone 'cause I can never hear on his phone. Hold on. The conversation was degrading in real time. Okay. Okay, please speak, Gary urged. Hello, keep an eye on. Okay, should I go out right now? Right now? Gary asked, actually considering obeying this phantom command. Okay, see. I'm not sure where Orion is now, but we'll go outside. We show double from me. Repeat that again. That phrase, show double from you. It hung in the air, a riddle wrapped in a threat. The voice was failing, slowing down as if its power source was dying. Then, the line went dead, leaving the Sudbrink household in a silence that was louder than any scream. There was nothing left to do but try to sleep, to lie in the dark and wonder what was watching them from the sky. After a night spent jumping at every shadow, the family dared to hope it was over. The sun rose and set the next day with no contact. The ordinary hours felt like a gift. But at 10:21 p.m., as the darkness solidified outside, the phone rang its final, terrible ring. Gary answered, his voice hollow with exhaustion. Yes, this is me. Can I ask why can I ask why you're calling? Can I please ask? He stammered, his military discipline completely eroded. The voice on the other end was a ghost of a sound, barely there. Yes, that is me, Gary confirmed, leaning into the receiver, desperate for any clue. The voice began its final transmission, its last words fragmenting into pure, incomprehensible noise. To be within this. The voice on the line was crumbling, its signal dying, but it was desperate to speak its final piece. Planet, Gary asked, trying to anchor the conversation to any kind of reality. Say that again, leave, I'm staying right here. Be within this planet, is this a joke or what? To be contact the same you. I have to think about that, the voice replied, its logic inhuman. I'd like to see you. To be contact as the same with you. Hey, let me tell you something, Gary said, his patience snapping. I've been listening to you and I've had contacts with you. Government interference. You said government interference. Please explain what type of interference. The entity's response was a burst of fragmented warning. Govern interference, its visitations to be disrupted by them. Dark, some will rise from the dark side of the morning. The words landed like stones. This was no longer about Orion or his travel plans. This was a warning. "Okay," Gary whispered, the air gone from his lungs. What branch of the government? What should I do? Government interference. Visitations to be disrupted." "Okay," Gary asked, pleading for a simple answer in a world that had none. "Is that good for me or bad?" The line went dead with a soft click. "They hung up," he said to the silent room. From the very beginning of this final call, the voice seemed to be confirming the father's wildest hopes and deepest fears. It stated its purpose in broken, halting English, as if translating from a language that had no words for our world. "We come to be within this planet to visit the many, to be contacted as the same with you." The sentences were accompanied by strange, biological clicks and audio distortions, like the sound of something struggling to breathe our atmosphere. When Gary's uncle, the other witness to the West Virginia sighting, got on the line, the caller's tone shifted. It became a messenger of doom, warning them of government interference that would attempt to disrupt visitations. It spoke of the dark side of the moon, its voice fading, becoming a ghost on the wire until, with a final, soft click, it was gone forever. The Sudbrink house would never hear from it again. So what are we left with? What do we make of the Sudbrink phone calls? On the surface, it's easy to write it off, an elaborate, cruel prank. And the technology of the time gives that theory some legs. The talk boy, a kid's toy from the 90s, could slow down and distort a voice. And it's true, if you speed the recordings up, the voice hidden underneath starts to sound a little more like a person. "Gary Sudbrink, are you there? You're going to be back from Texas." You being impersonated by the other voice. Maybe it was a friend, a colleague with a twisted sense of humor who went to insane lengths to mess with a guy and never, ever confessed, even decades later in the anonymous heart of the internet. But then you have to look at everything that happened around the calls. The two men, one in an overcoat, one on the plane, harassing him with questions. The black helicopter, hovering so low it shook the windows of his Texas home. His brother seeing his doppelganger on the highway, the perfect copy of his voice calling his friend Mike. You can't just explain that away with a tape recorder. This leads to the other skeptical theory, the one that's maybe even darker. What if Gary did it all? What if he manufactured the entire nightmare? The stories of the men, the helicopter, the phone calls, just to mess with his UFO-obsessed father. If that's true, then Gary Sudbrink wasn't just a prankster. He was a psychological mastermind, a flawless actor who built an intricate web of terror around his own family. And if that's the case, the biggest question remains, why would he never, ever confess? The punchline is the best part of the joke. So why take the real, chilling truth of what happened to him to his grave? The line is dead, the calls have ended, and we are left alone in the silence, with only the echoes of a mystery that refuses to die. But if it was a prank, it was a prank that never ended. The man at the center of it all, Gary Sudbrink, never acted like someone who had pulled off a joke. He never bragged, he never confessed. He carried the secret for over a decade, only whispering it for the first time in the hallowed halls of a UFO conference. He's given interviews, yes, but he's never tried to cash in. He's never sold the story. For a hoaxer, that's the strangest behavior of all. So if not a prank, then what? The clues point us toward the stars. The mentions of Orion, the full moon, the warning of government interference. It's a script ripped straight from the darkest corners of ufology. And Gary Sudbrink is far from alone. Other witnesses, other researchers like John Keel of Mothman fame have reported these same bizarre, nonsensical phone calls from the void. The calls began after his father's sighting, but the voice only ever asked for Gary. Was it because he wore the uniform of the United States Air Force? Perhaps the voice was exactly what it sounded like. An extraterrestrial intelligence, trying to patch a call through to our world using technology it barely understood. If such beings communicate not with words, but with thoughts, then speaking English would be like trying to sculpt with smoke. The message would be broken, the phrases foreign and incomplete, a desperate, clumsy attempt to make contact. Or perhaps the truth is even closer to home and infinitely more sinister. This could have been a government operation, a psychological warfare test, Gary's role as an Air Force pharmacist or his father's UFO obsession could have painted a target on his back. The calls, the men at the airport with their notebooks and wrong seats, it all fits the pattern of a psy-op designed to watch, to unnerve, to see how long it takes for a man to break. And the men in black are never subtle. Their threat is in their strangeness, a performance so overt it becomes terrifying in hindsight. But to understand this story, you have to return to the very beginning. To a Long Island road, a year before the phones ever rang, where Gary's brother saw him, but it wasn't him. It was his car, his face, but it was a doppelganger. This is the key that unlocks the entire nightmare. The voice on the phone knew it. You're being impersonated by the other voice. Show double of you. His friend Mike confirmed it, speaking to a perfect copy of Gary's voice down to the fake cough. The entity on the phone didn't have Gary's thick New York accent. It was a mimic, a copy, and stories of doubles and mimics are as old as the UFO phenomenon itself. So the burning question isn't about UFOs. It's why Gary, he was a skeptic. He never saw a thing. What if the UFO sighting was a red herring? What if Gary Sudbrink himself was the phenomenon, the sole subject of an attention from something that could wear his face and steal his voice? Some have even ventured a more terrifying idea. A crack in time, a temporal distortion that let a version of Gary from another reality bleed into our own. But even that doesn't explain the warnings of aliens and government conspiracies. After nearly 40 years, the silence is the only answer we have. The Sudbrink phone calls remain a perfect, unsolvable puzzle, a story that dances on the razor's edge between paranoia and reality, leaving us to wonder if the line was ever truly disconnected. Whether it was a prankster, a shadowy government agency, or a voice from the stars, one chilling truth remains. This story is a monument to the darkness that still lingers at the edges of our understanding, a haunting reminder that some mysteries are never meant to be solved. They simply echo in the static forever.